Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the all-new Eachine Wizard X220HV. HV standing for High Volt. Yes, this is a 6S freestyle copter. This is not in its stock configuration, which is a little bit of a naughty thing for me to do, but there were some things that I thought needed changing. And I saw loads of videos saying it's the best thing since sliced bread. You can't build anything like this for cheaper, and actually that isn't true, because a couple of weeks ago I did my 100 GBP build and it flies superb. So yeah, let's take a look at the specs of this one. I think it costs about £150 at the making of this video, and let's take a look at the specs. So we have got Eachine branded motors. They are a 2306 and the kV is 1650 kV. That is because we need to lower the kV when we go up in volts. So it is the equivalent of, I think, around about 2450 kV for a 4S copter. And I'm not going to go in too much detail about the differences between 4S and 6S. I'm not sure that 6S needs to be on a freestyle copter. If you are complaining about battery sag, then I would say that you have been using the wrong battery, because most people are using a 1300 milliamp 4S on their 4S rigs, and these batteries were fine on a 2205 stator motor, but ever since we went up from there, they cannot provide enough amps for these crazy stator motors that we are putting on there. And if you use a bigger battery, such as a 1500 or a 1800, you won't get as much voltage sag, and these batteries are a little bit cheaper, although I have to say that was one of the downsides of 6S, is that they were more expensive, but the price of 6S batteries are coming down now because it's becoming popular. So do what you want, but yeah, I'm not so sure that 6S is needed for freestyle. But for racing, yes, I suppose there is a benefit, because there are events where you have to get as many laps in as possible in 2 minutes, and at the end of the 2 minutes the 4S pack is sagging, so you have to back off the throttle, whereas the 6S packs, you can go right to the end. You don't get better flight times, I don't think, if you use a equivalent watt-hour battery, but you don't get that sag, so you can, you know, get more laps in and not have to come off the throttle. That's all I'm going to say on 6S. The motors have a hollow shaft and the nuts are also directional. We have got a hex screw underneath, which is great for this time of year, because if you crash, the motor gets caked in mud and you have to get the toothbrush out, and it makes the motor very easy to take apart, to take the ball off and get in there and really clean everything. One thing that I would have liked to have seen is these naked bottom motors lately. They've been adding a lip to stop the wires catching on the bow, and this does not have that. So you can see the heat shrink for the wires. I think it's almost touching the motor, and I don't like that, but yeah, we'll have to see if it causes any problems with them catching while flying. So this frame is actually a low profile frame, and we've got a lot of stuff packed in here, and I think this is why people are saying you can't make something like this for the money. But just you wait till later when you see what is actually inside this thing and maybe some potential issues that it might have. So with it being a low profile frame, to get the camera to tilt the same as the NoPro, what you have to do is have this bit come down here, and we've got a little bar there. So, you know, if you hit concrete hard, then that is going to break. In fact, they even know that because they provided an extra one of those standoffs and an extra standoff as well, which is pretty nice. And we've got these nuts underneath here which protrude as well, and those protrude even more than this, so yeah, they could get pretty battered if you are skidding along the ground. So I don't know, maybe you'd want to put the foam feet that they provide so that it lifts it off the ground there. So the camera is the Foxeer Arrow Micro. The lens is 2.5mm. Bit of an issue though, because they had left the on-screen display on there, and they have removed the two wires to control the on-screen display. So what I had to do was disconnect it. You can't even use the same connector that they have used and like maybe just shove the pins in there, because the ground shares the same ground for the camera. So I had to again use another copter, just like the TS130 that they released. That had the same problem. I don't know whether it's just been lazy or what. But yes, I had to remove the on-screen display that the camera came with, and if you don't have all of the gear for that, then you are stuck with that, as well as the on-screen display that comes with the flight controller. So the ESCs, they are BL-HELI-S, so not 32-bit, so D-Shot 600 capable, and you can do your D-Shot commands. The flight controller is an Omnibus F4SD, and it also does have a SD card there as well. It didn't really have any setup whatsoever. The only things that were set up were the important things such as the ports. So, you know, we've got a VTX that has smart audio that was set up. We have got the SpeedyBee Bluetooth module, and that had the MSP turned on, but more about that later. And then we've got the buzzer board at the back here as well, and that's connected up correctly, but it was not set up in Betaflight. So the VTX is at the back, and it is 40 channel. It's got smart audio, as I mentioned, and it's also using a MMCX connector. We've got this 3D printed mount at the back here. Now, the antenna that it comes with is a TBS stubby copy, which is why you won't find any TBS stuff on Banggood's website unless you buy through Diatone. Now, something that I had to do was I had to use a socket set, and you see this nut here. This, when I screwed it on, the top was spinning around, and what that means is that the pin isn't connected to the VTX, so you might as well be running the VTX without an antenna, and that's just gonna burn out. So what I did was I got a socket set and I tightened it really tight, and it has actually forced it into the TPU there. But now what you should get when you tighten it up is that it shouldn't spin at all. So if I just tighten this fully here, can you see? Doesn't spin at all. I mean, if you put pressure on it, it'll spin a little bit, but this thing was just, you know, spinning around on its own. So that is something that you definitely need to do. Interestingly, we've got two holes here for your antennas for your receiver, but you aren't given the straws, so I've just stuck them on the arms there, and I'm using a XM Plus. It comes with a servo connector, and I've got that connected to the XM Plus there, and that is just sitting on this board. And what this board is one of those lost model alarms. So if I plug a battery into it, the beeper is very loud, and it is underneath as well. so you know we have a recess for that. We've got this light here, and then after a while it will start beeping very, very loud. So to get it to start beeping, we've got a button on the side of which you just press. Now, because I'm heavy-handed, I pressed the button and it fell off. And there was no way to stop it. I was trying to plug it in and do the counting thing, because some of them have that, and I could not get it to stop beeping. So I had to take it all apart very quickly and then disconnect the LiPo. Luckily, I was able to find the button and solder it back on, but be very careful, because I have a feeling there's going to be a few instances of that button falling off, and it is very high maintenance to solder this thing back on, I will tell you. Now you get these two nice grippy battery straps, but I've also added a silicone mat which you don't get in the package. You borderline probably don't need one because you've got two of these grippy straps, but I just like it for extra safety. And you can see I am not using the NoPro mount that they provide. This is actually designed to fit the Runcam 3S, but the way that it fits is we've got a single hole here, and you are to use a cable tie, and it just wobbles around, and you are just not going to get great footage out of it. Even if you're using a GoPro, it's going to wobble around, and you're definitely not going to be looking like Mr. Steele with this guy. This is the Brain 3D GoPro mount, and the quality is just fantastic. It's the one for the Martian, and it just about fits. You have to give it a little bit of force to get it to go on, but that's usually the case for most things, isn't it? By the way, my cheap freestyle build that I did for £100, the internals will all take 6S, and they have released the Samguk motors for 6S as well now, so it might make it a little bit more expensive, but I do still think that you could build it for cheaper than this guy. And you could also build it probably for about the same price using the Teco 32-bit ESCs and the Airbot F4 and have a really nice freestyle setup. And one thing that I like about the Martian frame as well, freestyle for me is all about getting the props out of shot, and because this one is slightly squished, what you'll see is when the props are straight there, they are out of shot of the camera, but on this one, when I put the props out straight, the props are further forward, so there's more chance of them getting in shot. However, the angle on this GoPro mount is about 20 degrees. The Martian GoPro mount is 30, so there's a good chance that we aren't going to get the props in shot with this one either, which is a good thing. The arms are 5mm carbon, so those are going to be really difficult to break, and there's no flex in them whatsoever. The weight with the NoPro is 505 grams, and then with your 1050 6S battery, it is going to weigh 692 grams. That is a consequence of 6S. However, for freestyle, weight is a good thing, because I found that when you have a heavy copter, that it kind of flies smoother and you get less prop wash oscillations. And speaking of props, they are really tickling my fancy here, because they have provided my favorite props, which is the Dell Cyclone T5046C, and you get a spare set of those in the package. So I have removed the top plate so that we can see everything that is inside, and also the modifications that I believe need to be made. Starting off with the 50 volt low ESR capacitor. It is 1000 microfarad, and as you can see, it just about fits between the camera and the stack. Now I have put it on a wire, which isn't the most efficient thing to do. The best thing to do is to connect it directly to the battery connectors which are there, but I didn't want it sticking out. By the way, if you are wondering why does it need to be 50 volt, well, a 6S battery fully charged is 25 volts or there around. Is it 25.2, something like that, a little bit lower under load. And the reason that we use these capacitors is to smooth out voltage spikes, and sometimes voltage spikes can be double the voltage of the battery. So 50 volts is double 25 volts of 6S, so that is why you use a 50 volt capacitor. And as you can see, it only just fits in there, and these capacitors here, they have got a metal component on the outside, and that is because they are actually designed to explode. Now, I'm not hoping that it's going to explode, but I've added some electrical tape there because, of course, carbon does conduct, so I didn't want any issues there. So yeah, that's the first modification that I have got, and it doesn't seem to affect the camera angle. It fits in there nicely. Now, the second modification that I have done is I have soft mounted the ESC board, and the reason that I have done that, and I've mentioned this in other videos as well, is that we have 4 screws that go through the arms and they connect to the stack. And what can happen is, especially in cheap bind and flies, is that you get vibrations from the motors. They may not have been balanced correctly, or they're just not good quality, and the vibrations reach the flight controller. Now, in this instance, it isn't really possible to soft mount the flight controller, so I've soft mounted the ESCs, and that is because the flight controller connects via these pins here. So if you add a soft mount here, the pins don't connect. I suppose you could use smaller standoffs, but I don't have any, so hopefully that is going to have some effect. Otherwise, I do think we would suffer some vibration issues. So the flight controller is an interesting one because there are no solder points at all. So we have got the camera that connects here up the front, and then we have got the receiver there, which from what I can see is only S-bus, so it's inverted. And then we have got the VTX, which unplugs here, and then we have got underneath here the Bluetooth module, and this is the thing that I am worried about the most because it's the SpeedyBee Bluetooth module. And I made a video on this, and what you have to do with this Bluetooth module is you have to create a switch. You have to set up a soft serial, and that is so when you arm the copter it disables the Bluetooth, and that is because the Bluetooth runs on 2.4 gigahertz, which is the same frequency as your receiver. And as you can see, I've got my receiver right next to the Bluetooth module, and they have not done any of that. They have removed the switch from the Bluetooth module. There is no way to solder anything to a soft serial because there's no solder pads, so the Bluetooth module is always switched on. Now, I don't know, maybe they have done some tests and it turns out that because of frequency hopping, etc., it doesn't affect the range, or they wanted you to put the receiver up here where I've put this capacitor to give some distance. However, I don't think that amount of distance would be enough to not interfere. And when you get this as the plug and play, the servo connector comes out of the back, so it suggests that they actually want you to put the receiver on the back here like I have done. So just some sticky tape there. I did cut off one of the standoffs there in order to use the pins. Of course you can chop it off and solder it direct, but I like to reuse my receivers in other models, so I've started using these pins here. So yes, this is something that I am worried about. I am going to test it. Luckily, because everything is on these connectors here, we can just disconnect it. And if you are thinking, oh well, I can't get this anyways because it doesn't have a spare UART for FlySky, then what you could actually do is just disconnect the Bluetooth module and then use this one here because it's a TX and an RX, and then hook up your FlySky receiver. The only thing I will say is you'll have to use the small one rather than the large one because there is no room for a large receiver in this model here. So this last connector here is for the buzzer board, so we can completely disconnect that and it should say buzz if we take a look there. So yeah, just a LED and buzzer connector there, but yeah, actually there is a solder pad and it is for the VBAT and ground, but as you can see there, nothing else on there. So I think, you know, the plug and play element is good in some respects, but if you are having problems or want to do modifications, then, you know, you're going to have to get a load of these connectors and, you know, mess around with that. It does look like as well, by the way, that this was part of another stack because we've got some pins here for a VTX to connect. Now they say on Banggood's site that it is some specially designed flight controller, but the target is an Omnibus F4 SD and it looks very, very similar to the one in the Aurora stack, so I believe it's just that one. But yeah, SD card slot there. Anyways, let's get all of this back together. So what else do you get in the box? Well, you get some cable ties, you get some spare screws, which is always nice. You get the standoffs, which I've already talked about. You get the 4 spare props, which I've already talked about. And you get the feet, which I've talked about. You get the NoPro mount for the run cam as well. And you get a pair of carbon spanners, and that is everything. So these are the 2 batteries that I'm going to be displaying. We have got the Tattoo 1550 high volt 4S 100C. It weighs a little bit more than the 6S actually, which as you can see has got thinner cells, but they are as equivalent as it gets. So 1050 milliamp and 95C for the 6S battery. So I know you guys are going to want to know the difference between 4S and 6S with this thing in terms of power, because I know a lot of people have got the idea to get this thing and start off in 4S, and then when you get to 6S you are basically at what the performance of a 4S model is with higher kV motors. So let's try for a punch. It's still not bad at all. You can recover nicely. Try that again. Yeah, it's actually plenty for a beginner. And let's see if I can go into acro. No problems. We have enough power to pull out of maneuvers, but it is not scary power. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? Pretty versatile. and this is just the stock Betaflight tune, and seems to be flying nicely. That does not surprise me though, we have got a GoPro on here. Okay, so 6S should be a little bit more feisty, starting off in angle mode, and let's see what the difference in punch is like. Wow, it really is night and day, but that's what I expected. It's actually very loud as well. That is either that these motors are a slightly higher kV than the rating, or it literally is just the fact that we have less voltage sag. But wow, that is loud. So yeah, if you're trying to be inconspicuous, this isn't your guy for sure, but it does seem to handle right from the bottom, so you can start off with your 4S and then get crazy with your 6S. Listen how noisy that thing is though. I can hear it echoing all around the place. To see if I can get a blast out of it. That's just madness. Yeah, I can see myself upsetting people with this guy. But really, when you switch these two batteries, you shouldn't have to do too much with the tune, theoretically, because the weight of the battery is the same, so you should be able to use the 6S tune. Now, I know it's got more power on 6S, but you know, if you work it the other way around, then you should be fine. These are just the stock PIDs, by the way, and I have a feeling it's going to be absolutely perfect on the stock PIDs, because I've got a GoPro on here, and stock PIDs are designed for a GoPro. So I'm not sure whether 6S needs to be in the freestyle world, but regardless, let's land this guy and do some FPV with it. Now sadly, all of that work fitting that capacitor in did not get rid of the noise, and I tried a lot of things. I even tried 35 volt capacitors and soldering it directly to the battery leads, and also sticking an LC filter on the VTX and also a capacitor on the VTX, and no matter what I did, these lines were just over the video. So I don't know if that is just not enough filtering on the ESCs. When I took it apart, there seemed to be lots of ceramic capacitors, but of course when you go up in voltage you do tend to get more noise. However, these lines were on the screen when I flew it on 4S as well, so yeah, a bit of a strange one. That, you know how much noise bothers me, so that is why it has taken so long for this video to come out. But the quick answer is there's no way to get rid of it unless you switch the ESCs out. But I do think adding the soft mount helps, because this thing is flying absolutely superb. It's flying as well as my cheap Martian build and as well as my KISS build, you know, which is quite a big statement to make. Now, as for the sag, there still is a sag, so you know, I don't think it's beneficial to freestyle, and you could actually hear the note of the motors change when I did full throttle. The current meter, by the way, you might be thinking, oh, it's drawing much less current. The current meter is out. When I recharged the battery, it put 1,000 milliamps back in, and I think it landed at around about 700, so that needs calibrating. So would I recommend this copter? Well, that depends on how much video noise bothers you. By the way, the Bluetooth thing being on didn't seem to affect it. Oh, one thing I will say is I was gonna do a setup video, but I've done that many setup videos. The setup is almost the same as my cheap build that I did. The one important thing to note about this one is you need to up the digital idle speed, because I got a flip of death, and that is because, of course, the motors are a lower kV, so they are spinning at a slower rate at idle throttle. So if you do a fast roll, and I've got a fast rate, then you will get a flip of death. And when I said that these arms look pretty difficult to break, well, the arm delaminated, and sadly at the making of this video you cannot get a replacement. So luckily it's just delaminated and I can still fly it, but yeah, I thought that was worth mentioning there. So yeah, no difference in the flight time really, you know, 3.5 minutes is what I can get out of a 1550. So I will let you argue in the comments whether 6S is for the freestyle world. So before I end this video, and I know it's been a long one, but I wanted to make sure that I covered as much as possible for you guys, because I know some of you rely on these videos on whether you're going to pull the plug on a model or not. And you might see a lot of comments around on this one saying things like you couldn't individually pick the components and build a copter for this price and get better results. And with this Wizard HV, I don't believe that is true, and I'm going to show you the components that I would choose if I was trying to build something similar. Of course you'd have to build it, but I think you will get better results. So for the battery strap, doesn't really matter. I like to choose these Dasing ones because they have a checker pattern, but they are also grippy on the outside as well. For the camera, I would use the Foxeer HS1177V2. It is the cheapest CCD camera out there, and I choose the 2.5mm lens. Doesn't really matter, NTSC or PAL. And then for the VTX, I would use the iFlight Force VT5804. That is because it has been used in conjunction with this stack before on the HobbyMate Meteor and the HobbyMate Comet, and it produces squeaky clean video. It's also got smart audio and switches up to 600 milliwatt. And then yes, of course, we can use the Omnibus F4 V6 flight controller with this stack here, which has an 8-volt out. And I think that is one of the problems with this new Wizard, is that the flight controller only has a 5-volt out. So the VTX has to go through the VBAT, and you get all of that noise, and no matter how much filtering you put on there, you always get the noise. Whereas with this one, we've got an onboard regulator. It kind of gives a bit of separation. And then we've got the Typhoon 32-bit 35 amp ESCs, which are known for being a great low noise ESC. So for the frame, I would use the Martian Anniversary Special Edition. Now, this is a controversial one, as it was in my cheap build, because it is a clone of the Impulse RC Alien. I would say it's less of a clone these days because it is smaller and the parts don't fit. Of course, if you don't agree with that, then you can go with the Rotor Riot CL1 or the TBS Force 1, which are trying to tackle these cheap clone frames and produce them at a similar price. The props, I would go with the same ones, the Dial Cyclone T5046C, and then for the motors, I would go for these new Samguk 2306 1750 kV 4-6S motor, because the 4S version has been brilliant. And then if you really want a buzzer board, I find them annoying. It's not the same one, but we've got the Lantium one down here. And what price are we at? We are at £148 with some wholesale discount. But I have missed out the SpeedyBee Bluetooth adapter, which is currently sold out. Interesting that that didn't interfere. I do wonder if I'd have gone out further that I would start to get problems. But yeah, with that added, it's very cheap and I'm bad at maths. So £153.93 for that lot. And then the Wizard, £152. We are £1 over. But I think we have far superior components. With what I've picked here, we've got 32-bit ESCs with better filtering, and I think, you know, it's always good to build your own models so you know what goes into them, you know. I know people don't have a lot of time, but the amount of questions I get when people have bought an RTF and never built one before and say, oh, this motor isn't working, why is that? You know, I would always say build one first. Oh, and this price doesn't include this rubbish GoPro mount, but you're going to get rubbish footage from it anyway, so buy the Brain 3D one. And there you go, that is my review on the Eachine Wizard X220HV. If you liked it and can afford to do so, I will link to my Patreon in the below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.